Hello. The theme of the webinar is my teachings about God, the method of control of equipment through the interaction of microprocesses to ensure eternal life. In this topic, I consider such projection of consciousness on microprocesses, where the soul and spirit are certain levels and certain channels for the access of consciousness into the microprocesses of the material physical plane. And just as God does when He carries out control of the consequential type, that is, by creating an information object, He immediately lays the entire history of the future development of this information object. Here too, the same principle will be used in this method, where the interaction with microprocesses makes it possible to obtain a certain consequential area that practically enables you to further control precisely some technical system. Thus, in order to implement this method, it is necessary to arrange the action of the soul and spirit in the space of information so that these actions were almost like the system of access of consciousness to microprocesses. And this arrangement in the action should be such that the microprocesses themselves must be near, because the further action of consciousness will be precisely the interaction of some neighboring areas at the micro level. For this, at the geometric level, you can imagine the sign of infinity, which is located horizontally on a plane. And at the same time, for example, on the right side of this sign, it is possible to direct the action of the soul, and on the left side, you can direct the action of the spirit. And further, at the point of intersection, where the second part of the sign of infinity begins, at the intersection point, you can visualize number 8 perpendicular to this plane, which in shape also corresponds to the sign of infinity. And then, through this number, you can go over directly to control through consciousness. Thus, the action of consciousness is an element of control that contains the action of the soul and the action of the spirit, because within the area of space, which is in the sign of infinity, some action is taking place as well. And it turns out that, for example, one half of the sign and the second one is also a certain level of interaction from the point of view of consciousness. And here it is possible to move on to a quite simple logical level of creating the next reality of action to the same one that God applied, the creator of the world, where consciousness, as if necessarily, is reproducing the next action. And just here is the element precisely of ensuring the eternity of life that is being generated by this element of consciousness, which necessarily, with the reproduction of consciousness, implies the presence of the physical body. And, for example, in the applied aspect, when setting the device For the development of concentrations of eternal life PK1U, there is precisely the certain functional level when, with the developed consciousness, the use of the device leads to the full development of the concentration of eternal life. There is the principle here that the following space of development always exists. If you look carefully at this particular level of development, it becomes clear why in principle the world exists as such, that the initial development of principle that was laid by God into any moment of reality and into the entire infinite future is realized from a certain law that at the level of light forms it is possible to see just as the necessary one next action of concentration after the initial one. And a certain divine principle of reality is being identified in this as well when God, having created an element of reality, immediately created the next one. Because having created, for example, himself at the time of action as well, he creates immediately, of course, everything around. Therefore, this principle of transition from the one impulse nature of the action to the whole impulse, we can say, so to the whole of reality, will make it possible to distinguish those micro levels that through interaction will still come to the controlled action which is necessary for the control of technical systems. And this controllability is precisely determined by the fact that control of consciousness is always present here. And this is the very important element in this case of control, which indicates that we can control by consciousness almost any element of reality in development and in the next development after some stage of development has been passed. And therefore the access to consciousness is unlimited in fact. Thus we can penetrate by consciousness into any micro element and by an effort of will, for example, visualizing the same 8, which is perpendicular to the sign of infinity, we can practically, as if squeeze some neighboring elements to touch one another. And as soon as the contact of these micro-elements occurs within any technical system, that is, if to go over to the atomic level of any machine, consider the substance from which the machine is built, and you can locally take any part of the substance. But it is better to take in that area which is more significant by weight in terms of the final visual perception of, and of the second is by weight in terms of perception of this technical object through the controlling clairvoyance. By the way, it is also possible to consider here one of the controlling principles of work of the device for the development of concentration PK1U when the perception precisely at the physical level, for example, of the external optical unit, and at the level of the controlling clairvoyance, the change of the parameters in the electromagnetic field in combination with internal optical structures makes it possible to create instantly precisely the controlled interaction that can be directed through the micro level to any structure. And exactly here, substantial and sometimes single and qualitative, that is, many times increase of controlling capacity, many times actually occurs. And in the modified structure of the device PK1U, where special light amplification via an additional button is used, and then it interacts in a certain technology with the systems near the lenses, exactly the numbers make it possible to amplify the controlling action, and moreover at multiple levels, because numbers is also a control through consciousness. And so we can say that if we imagine and by control will reach this level of intersection of the sign of infinity with the 8 so that they are almost perpendicular to each other, then if we simply imagine that strictly speaking the signs are at some distance from each other, and we mentally squeeze them into contact, then a complete controllability of precisely the control level through consciousness, and consciousness controls all structures of external control. And then it turns out that controllability due to consciousness occurs in the fact that consciousness actually perceives quite clearly that there is the sign infinity, there is the sign 8, that is the number 8, and it turns out the object of action, that is, what consciousness works with in this case, is quite a fixed value, that is, well-known signs. And it turns out that when we consider these processes, at the same time we can add a very important element for this control, which is that we can view the microprocesses of control immediately as structures that already provide eternal life, where there is not only the action of control of technical systems, of some equipment to ensure eternal life is carried out, but vice versa, when some already practice methods of ensuring eternal life at the micro level, they, in the opposite direction respectively, practically or thematically, provide a state of equipment that ensures eternal life. That is, there is an interaction practically at the multi-level plan of action where a direct signal that is sent by the soul and spirit is passing, and it is concentrated by additional knowledge, and the impulses from the structure of eternity that already provide eternal life are passing in control towards this signal, and thus the signal, strictly speaking, of these bidirectional actions, mutually directed, will of course ensure eternal life, because this intersection occurs in any case in the structure of eternity. And it turns out that this structure, it practically guarantees complete controllability from the point of view of ensuring the eternity of the whole process of action, because here, in fact, it is inside a certain sphere of control that is before you. In your perception, this sphere is also controlled. And in principle, even if we consider the control without any external structures of a technical action, but just through a symbolic system, through numbers, for example 8, and we can add another 8 as well as the sign of infinity, then we get that the outer sphere, the controlling sphere, can be simply replaced as if with another number 8. It turns out that there are two numbers 8 instead of one 8, and at the same time the external space is not limited. That is, the controlling space cannot, for example, somehow reduce the speed of control due to its boundaries, because as consciousness passes through the sphere, you practically pay attention to it anyway. Some milliseconds of time can be wasted on it, some attention and time is distracted. And when we control through the action of the soul and spirit, it is just the overcoming of the sphere of the spirit to the level of infinite action, that is, the determination of certain creative levels of spiritual development, takes place here, so that actually instantaneous action of the spirit does not leave contours in the near control, and you no longer keep attention and control even faster. Thus you can gain the necessary speed of control, which is needed to achieve some action person from some control systems, objectified in your perception by some boundaries, to unlimited control systems, which in general are quite typical in the ordinary three-dimensional perception, when there is some space from an object to another object, which generally speaking is not limited towards the cosmos. And then it turns out that when we bring closer such perception of physical space with the perception on the spiritual level, we are bringing to feel more accurately, as if to feel the equipment, the technical system. And it is even possible to understand in many ways by some mental and in the first place by kind of intuitive movement of thought, that the equipment becomes subordinate to control. And when working with the device for the development of concentrations PRK1U, including when setting up this device individually for users, there is also a task to make such a calculation that there is an average statistic in the control. And this calculation is practically done when it is possible to use a certain standard level where many people can already use it, and then to move on to an individual level where there is already some specific number, a small number of people. It turns out that we can, well, know in this system, in the work of the device, when there is always some kind of average statistics that should be developed for everyone. That is why it is important to reflect the results so that they are analyzed and provided for everyone for further application. The interaction of the macro task, in fact, and the use of the mechanism of device, such as PRK1U of this type of devices, takes place to ensure that the real provision of eternal life for all is a fairly quick action. And it turns out that when we start such a control, it is important, for example, to compare what we can control due to this device for the development of concentrations PRK1U with what happens in some unit of equipment that generally refers to any other technical systems. And when we use the device for the development of concentrations PRK1U and can ourselves diagnose and objectify then the action that is amplified with the help of PRK1U, then naturally it is easier for us to transfer to the control of any other technical system so that it could be controlled in terms of ensuring eternal life. And it turns out that the training which gives the device for the development of concentrations of eternal life PRK1U can also extend to control of technical systems of any level. And then it turns out that when we consider a technical system, that is, any intellectually reproduced system, it does not matter even of what level of organization, it is clear that it is possible to control this system through consciousness. This equates the possibilities of the necessity of eternal life for all living beings, regardless of their level of development. That is, if, for example, to consider the issue that some kind of intellectual development system is so high in development that it has created some very complex technical systems, then with this method it is possible just to unify the interaction with this even super developed system, and at the same time it will not pose problems, it will not limit the eternal development of any living being. And this is an important principle, generally speaking, in the universe, when the world was so primordially built that any development of the world still leads to the eternal life of all. And here it turns out that by adding an already cognized control system to the element, and by introducing it in the form of the element of consciousness, any microprocess, we can see that in practice the equipment begins to be realized from the point of view of ensuring eternal life, not only when we control this equipment by consciousness, but also in those cases when, for example, we distract the consciousness from the control over this equipment. That is, we bring our technical device to a certain, so to say, automated level from the point of view of universal interconnections, when the technical system in any case provides eternal life. Then it is understandable that it does not cause harm and begins to implement those processes that are aimed at securing eternal life into the structure exactly necessary for this implementation. And in this connection, we can say quite clearly here that when we consider the system of interaction in a complex way, that is, in terms of ensuring the eternal life of microprocesses that begin to be realized in such a way that they organize macro equipment in the structure of eternal life, then it will be possible to see more profoundly the entire internal technical system of any technical object. And as a matter of fact, due to the spiritual organization of some micro level at the atomic molecular level, at the level maybe of even smaller structures than the atom, we will be able as if to create again such a technical system due to consciousness in the control or generally in the reality of the world. Now, if we consider the process how God did that there are technical systems, there are some systems developed by man, but God, as the creator of the whole world at some specific moment, can also keep the whole world with his consciousness, and every technical system is also an element of his consciousness in this sense, that is, it is as if recreated constantly and newly. And then when we reach this level, which, by the way, the device for the development of concentration PK1U helps to do quicker and sometimes very quickly, the equipment becomes controllable in terms of the level of creation in the primary understanding of the world. Although it, of course, was created as a consequential system of the developed world. And yet, when we begin to understand at the fundamental level of the universe, it becomes controllable for infinite time, that is, for eternity, and it will be such that it will ensure eternal life even under some primary structures of its creation, for example, of a pure functional direction. And here it is possible to define one more law of the development of such equipment. When we reflect like that and ideologically direct the development of any system to ensure eternal life, then regardless of how and for what purpose the equipment was first created, it can always be brought by additional elements, namely by the technical elements connected with consciousness, for example, to such equipment that ensures eternal life for all. And so it turns out that when we consider these processes at micro level, we often manage to transfer quickly enough to universal, general control of technical systems. And thus the process becomes completely controllable. That is, the world primordially created for eternal life by God, and the next one, which is created due to the development of the world. These worlds are always developing in such a way that eternal life is realized for all in them. This concludes the webinar about the method, and now I will direct the video camera to the device for the development of concentrations PK1U, and accordingly, first, the concentration will take place without the device turned on. When I turn on the device, I'll tell you. Now, in accordance with the method of control and technology through the interaction of microprocesses to ensure eternal life.
В соответствии с методом управления техники посредством взаимодействия микропроцессов для обеспечения вечной жизни,
the application of the device for development of concentrations of PK1U can take place most effectively in such a way that in the part that is visible on the screen to the right and somewhere in the center from the top, which is illuminated more, it is possible to imagine a number 8 that intersects the infinity sign, and then carry out concentration from the lower small lens counterclockwise, setting some more relevant goals and objectives. Now, the control will take place without the device turned on, and when I will turn on the device, I'll tell. Now I am turning on the device. The device is switched on. In about a minute, I'll turn off the device.
выключен.
The device is switched off.
Можно через сайт
It is possible to determine through the website www.grigori-grabovoi.world
для себя
any acceptable directions for you, for example, educational one, or more connected with the use of the device,
с применением прибора
including the educational aspect,
и
and in accordance with the mails given on the site,
можно
you can send the results of the use of the device today, since it is important for everyone to participate in the development of such equipment.
могут также через
Those who wish can also through this site and through the organizers of the webinars register for testing the device in order, for example, to use individually.
пользоваться индивидуально. Всем
I wish everyone a harmonious eternal life.
наилучшего.
Best wishes.